This is my perspective discussion series where women talk Budo. Hello and welcome to our first episode of season 2 of Women Talk Budo. I'm Kathy Okada and I'm here today with my co-host Fran Torres. Hi Fran.
Hello.
Hello. And we're extremely excited to be joined by Aikido and Iaido practitioner Roo Heins Sensei, chief instructor of Mitsubachi Dojo of Kalamazoo, Michigan. How are you, Sensei?
I'm fine, thank you. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So today we are going to be discussing how Japanese arts may manifest or be of use to people in the West. We also hope to ask Roo Sensei's views on matters around hierarchy, etiquette, and other aspects of practice that can be considered archetypal of Japanese culture. Before we get started, some of our listeners are practitioners of other martial arts, and I think they would appreciate learning a bit more about you.
Sure. My name is Roo Heins. My students generally call me Roo Sensei. I don't like being called Heins Sensei. I've been a practitioner of Aikido since 1994. I began in New Mexico, which is a state in the United States in the desert. And then after 5 years, I went and took my Shodan and moved to San Diego to study with Chiba Kazuo Shihan, who was my master. And I trained with him until 2004, when my then partner and I moved to Japan. Then I began practicing Aikido at Aikikai Hombu Dojo in Shinjuku. And I stayed in Tokyo. I left in 2011 and started a small dojo in Traverse City, Michigan, which is this tiny town in northern Michigan. Then things changed, and so I left Traverse City and traveled for a year, and I came back to the US, and then ended up moving to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and was lucky enough to join a dojo run by Dave Mata Sensei, also an Aikikai dojo, and he very kindly asked me to teach Aikido there. I think the deal, I was just like, I just need a place to train, and he's like, okay, you can come train here. I said, fine, I don't want to teach. And he said, well, what if I let you train for free and you can teach Iaido? And I said, okay. So we had a very nice relationship, and that lasted until COVID, and the dojo closed down in COVID, and I ended up moving down to Kalamazoo for various reasons. Ended up buying a house here, and then I started a dojo here. And so that dojo's been going for 3 years, and I think this is my dojo. It's called Kalamazoo Aikikai Mitsubachi Dojo. I teach Iaido and Aikido and Zazen. I don't teach Zazen, but we practice Zazen and tea ceremony there. And
Well, you
yeah,
practice tea ceremony as well in the dojo.
of course, yeah. That's it's quite closely. I connect it quite closely with my Aikido. I don't separate it. And my tea teacher was a rather he's kind of like iconoclastic, I suppose. He felt that practicing tea was more important than having a correct place to practice tea. But we can get to that later. Anyway, is that a good enough introduction? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
A very clear timeline as well. Thank you. We wanted to hear about this experience, very rich experience in more detail. So if you can tell us a bit more about the specific arts that you practice in this time, and what aspects do you think that have influenced you the more in how you practice now?
In Japan?
In Japan, yes.
In Japan, okay. Well, of course, I began Iaido in conjunction with my Aikido study. I started practicing Iaido, I think, about a year and a half after I started practicing Aikido. My first Aikido teacher was a man named Dennis Abbott, who I think is still around. He was a student of Chiba Sensei. And I had that gave me a very solid grounding in Birinkai or Chiba Sensei style of Aikido, which I'm very grateful for. And he also taught Iai. So I had been obsessed with swords since I was a kid and really wanted to learn Iaido and weapons. The practice in that dojo wasn't terribly strong. It was Aikido was a lot better than the other things, to be frank. But I got myself a bokken and a jo. I was very broke at the time, but I remember there was a guy in the dojo, very generous guy named Steve Goodell, and he gave me a gunto, a live blade to practice Iaido. He said, I think you're somebody who would really appreciate this, and you clearly love it, so take this blade. And forever grateful to him for giving me a real sword. Not anything great, but gunto is a World War II manufactured blade, but it's sharp. And this was a rather nice one. It had good fittings. It was a little short for me and heavy, but better than an Iaido, especially for the way Chiba Sensei practiced. So that was the sword I used. I really only used an Iaido when I came to Japan, and had to get one. Sometimes you can't use a live blade in wherever you're practicing, so I had to have an Iaido. And again, someone just gave me one. I've never bought one in my life. But now I guess we can talk about the progress of my Iaido in the context of Aikido. I study everything in the context of Aikido, and Chiba Sensei viewed Iaido as a kind of essential component to understanding Aikido, because Aikido is really based in the sword. Many of the deshi of O Sensei said that the techniques of Aikido are strongly related to the sword. Now, various practitioners, students of O Sensei, manifested that or didn't. A lot of his people didn't really relate Aikido to the sword. They had beautiful Aikido that was their own, and really from the body or from a different judo or whatever their frame of reference was for Aikido. But Chiba Sensei felt it was important to study sword, also because of the cultural. It's a cultural touchstone for him. Trying to transmit some sense of Japanese culture to his students, I think, was very important. And he wanted also, because Aikido's, it's not a competitive art, and because of its non-competitiveness, I think it can become rather slack. You lose that sense of danger. You didn't in Chiba Sensei's dojo, but often you see this. It's quite easy, and it happens in my own dojo. You don't want people to get hurt. We're taking care of each other. It's more of a collaborative art. So how do you maintain that sense of we really are dealing with a martial art, and martial things are about living or dying, that line. And so Chiba Sensei felt it was important to understand sword handling, something that really could kill, and its purpose. It only has one purpose. The sword only has one purpose. So that was Chiba Sensei's view of studying Iai in the dojo. And when I moved to Japan, he wanted me to continue studying Iaido. I think he felt that I had I don't know if it was that I was less talented in Aikido than he would have wanted, or that I actually did have some sort of talent in Iaido, but he was like, you should do Iaido. So I joined the Zen Nihon Kendo Renmei. I went to the dojo where Mitsuzuka Sensei, who was Chiba Sensei's Iai teacher, it was his dojo. Mitsuzuka Sensei by that time was not teaching anymore, and the dojo had been taken over by Kitsukawa Sensei, who taught me. And Iaido in Japan is competition based, and the Zen Nihon Kendo Renmei works with 12 forms called the Seitei Iai, which Chiba Sensei didn't have much respect for. He would criticize Japanese Iaido, but at the same time, he told me, you have to go there and
you
you
should
have to
do
get
it.
what you can, and you have to do it their way. Because I came after the second year. I didn't see him for 2 years. I couldn't go back to the US my first year in Japan. And then the second year I went back and said, Sensei, they want me to compete. And is that okay with you? Like, do you think that's, he's like, of course, you have to do it their way. And so then I kind of understood, like, okay, he wants me to really just do it, just find my way in this art, and not try to keep doing what he's doing. And so from then, that was what I did. And so I learned the Seitei Iai and did competitions in Japan, which was a very interesting experience. Tested in Japan. The difference between Japan and the US is very, very clear and very interesting in Iaido.
Right.
Iaido in Japan, Kitsukawa Sensei would kind of, they wanted me to get the vague outlines of the Seitei Iai, and they gave me the handbook, which has like all the checkpoints in it. Like, you start on your left foot, you put your hand here, and your tip comes out to here, and you perform kirioroshi with the feeling of thrusting the tip back past your ear, and the tip has to remain where all these like kind of rules. And I was like, this is whatever. I did the Seitei Iai because it was required, but I was always interested more in the Koryu. And so Kitsukawa Sensei was also, so we worked together a lot, Shoden, Shuden, Okuden. We did standing Okuden. He wasn't able to do seated Okuden, so I didn't work through those forms with him. Sorry, these are like the main curriculum of Muso Shinden-ryu and also
Yeah, yeah.
Ishin-ryu. They have different names, but they're linked techniques. They're similar. I've come to understand that the Seitei Iai are a tool. They're not forms in the way we think of the Koryu forms. They're a tool for teaching you to handle the sword. And the American teachers are very clear about each of the kata, and this is something you don't do in Koryu kata, but it's something you do in Seitei kata as a tool for handling the sword. Very precise about the process you go through for each step of each kata, and how are you drawing, how are you cutting, and it's been immensely useful for me in learning to control my sword, in learning to understand really hasuji and how my body works, and how exactly am I generating power in this particular movement? And breaking that down and studying it, maybe it was because of my Japanese language skills, but it's also the Japanese just don't do that. They don't look at technique in that way so much, at least in Iaido. Maybe in other arts they do. At least the people I was working with. And so that way of doing Iaido, of course, has changed my Iaido completely. I managed to pass fifth dan 2 years ago, I think. But it's also really informed my Aikido, figuring out how I move and generate power in EI, particularly with, I have really bad hips, it's congenital. So I've had both hips replaced. So I have some physical limitations in how I can move. But studying how I move in Iaido and strengthening my legs in a way that works with my body has utterly changed my Aikido. So it's been very interesting. That's been a very interesting kind of evolution for me. Shiba Sensei, I feel, he said once, I think, talking about himself and Kanai Sensei, he said Kanai Sensei made his Aikido like Iaido, and I made my Iaido like Aikido. And I can really see that. His Iaido was very wild, kind of from the lens of where I am now. Very not uncontrolled, but like kind of wild, very alive, very lively. But the body movements were not he didn't care if he moved his upper body. All he cared about was just getting to the target and cutting, which is at the heart, right? It's like the quote you sent me about tea. You heat the water, you whisk the tea. The Iaido's pretty simple. You take the sword out and you cut your target.
Yeah, so the quote that Roo Sensei is talking about is a quote by Senno Rikyu. First you heat the water, then you make the tea, then you drink it properly. That is all you need to know.
That is a very famous quote by Senno Rikyu. Yeah, sure. I mean, exactly. In the same way that Iaido is just taking the sword out and cutting your target, tea is just heating the water and making the tea. In the sense that if that's not there, you're not doing tea. If that's not there, you're not doing Iaido. And I think, many people aren't clear on this point in both arts. Many people get lost in like, oh, I got to do this temai and I'm using this antique bowl and like I'm using this tea and look at me, I've got this special fukusa and I'm dressed in kimono and
Yeah.
But your tea doesn't taste good and you're not offering it in the spirit of like, please drink this delicious thing right now that we just have this moment for. That
That's the
Ichi-go
essence
Ichi-e
of
is
it.
that's the essence of it, right? Ichi-go Ichi-e means one chance, one meeting, and that's tea ceremony, right? You're really just distilling everything down to we're here in this moment as humans and we have this moment. Let's drink it up. Let's put every bit of our senses into this moment and try to really live right now. Because
Can I ask you a question?
yeah.
Before you were describing where like this way of studying where you not necessarily dissect, but you study each bit of a technique to understand, as you said, like how to generate power in a specific way.
Mm.
Do you feel that maybe practicing in the US, I don't know how it looks like in Japan, that maybe could get to contradict this Ichi-go Ichi-e, like at some maybe at the level of a beginner, for example, where you get stuck into the step-by-step bit on the frames rather than on the film, let's say.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think this is a question of pedagogy. I don't think there's any hard and fast answer. Some teachers, for example, if you look at Yoshinkan Aikido, which I don't know much about, but I know a little bit about because that's kind of the tradition that came to Michigan, is the Yoshokai tradition, and Kushida Sensei was a student of Shioda Gozo Sensei. Uh, Yoshinkan Aikido is very prescriptive. You move your left foot here at this angle, and you move here. At the high level, Nidan Sandan and above, Yoshinkan Aikikai people look the same. They're all doing the Aikido flows the same. It's just a question of, which path you take up the mountain, right? I think people who are very gifted don't need this, but people maybe who aren't naturally physically gifted or who don't grasp things easily need sometimes a process, right? And I think I know certain people who are very critical of this, and they say, you're spoon feeding your students, you're digesting it for them. But I've seen people, beat their head against a wall for years, myself included. When a bit of simple, clear instruction could have saved them a lot of trouble. Now, some people, again, are going to say, well, that's the process and that's the whole point of studying. And I think, well, no, not really. In my opinion, not really. Not really. Our goal is to help people. For me, these arts are about finding a very clear channel of self-expression, like to get to the point where nothing gets in the way between yourself and the expression of the art. And if you're not able to do that because you're hindered by technical problems, then why not help with the technical problems so we can all get on the same road and find our own expression. That's how I see it. And I know there are people who will disagree vehemently, and that's fine. Maybe they're right.
It's interesting. Just to comment on what you're saying about these almost like wading through all of this stuff to get to this one thing, which is possibly. Could it be this, if we think about these different arts that you've practiced, specifically these traditional Japanese arts, you've done Sado, Aikido, Iaido, Karate. You've also practiced, or you do currently practice Zen as well. So I don't know if I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, or perhaps this is my own idea that these arts, all of these arts, perhaps at their core, in their essence, they kind of condense down to they're different expressions of the same thing. I haven't quite formed I haven't formed this idea properly yet, but I feel that there's a line that connects all of these arts, these Japanese arts. There's something running through each of them. I don't think I'm expressing myself clearly, but would you agree?
No.
I mean, you already said that you consider them. You don't consider them separate from your Aikido practice, for example.
That's correct. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I think yeah, I mean, that's a good point. All of these arts, not all of them. I would disagree about karate because it
Right.
is competition oriented, and Iaido,
Right.
when it becomes competition oriented, changes. So
Interesting.
in Zen, you sit on your own. There's no one who's going to help you. No one's going to rescue you. You're stuck with yourself. Aikido, you have a partner, but that partner is very generously lending their body and their energy so you can be stuck with yourself. You know, Iaido is very much like that too. And mm, you need another person. But I suppose one way to frame these arts is that you're trying to find that being in the moment that we talk about in Zen. That is, and Aikido has been called moving Zen. Iaido has been called moving Zen. I don't think karate has ever been called moving Zen, but you could find Zen in karate. I've certainly felt it doing kata in karate. And in tea, very much so. You're trying to fully, and again, I come back to the word self-expression because what we are is oneself in this body at this time. So being that self, I guess, is what I'm referring to as self-expression. It's a bit like art or music, but it's different, you know. But to me, it's also about understanding yourself and others as human, as a person. So when you study Iaido, as I mentioned, you're using a weapon that's meant to take life. How do you handle yourself while you're holding a weapon that takes life? For me, Iaido is very much about the sublimation of the ego, or not the sublimation, but really studying your ego, because you have a big shiny thing in front of you, as my friend Sakrita Sensei says, all your attention is on that big shiny thing in front of you, and you forget what you're doing, and you see it over and over. You know, when you're doing Iaido, and you're like, just close your left hand, you know, whatever it is, you know, and students get distracted by the big shiny thing in front of them, and they forget to close their left hand.
That hit me
particularly. Aikido too, yeah.
That hit me particularly when learning Junto, which is it's the kind of the kata of the second in
the kaishaku,
in seppuku ritual, suicide. And it's you know, and when I was first shown that, I actually felt quite emotional. I was like, well, this is, wow, you know, this is, we're not just learning shapes, and we're not just learning, you know, it's like, this is it's violence as well. And so
you know, there's a very
Go on.
book a book, I'm just looking it up, called Seppuku. I copy edited it when I worked at Kodansha. It's a great book. It's actually about the topic of seppuku. It's written in English. Andrew Rankin, that was his name. Yeah. So it's a history of seppuku. And that book was so informative for my execution of Junto. I really recommend you read it if you're affected, because I also feel this way about Junto. It's a very emotional kata.
Yeah.
I would disagree that it's violent.
Right.
And you can, I feel the other kata are much more violent. Junto and maybe Koranto are executed in a spirit of compassion. I mean, some people would say all of these kata are executed in a spirit of compassion. I would debate that. To me, Shuden and Okuden are just straight up assassination techniques. Maybe you can frame Shoden as compassionate killing. But Junto definitely is performed in a different spirit with.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, I'm interested to read that book that you mentioned.
Yeah, definitely recommend it. Definitely recommend it. Really great book.
Fran, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah.
No, I'm just because I don't practice Iaido, so I feel like I'm learning a lot about like some of the maybe underlie, like all the layers that it has. It's, well, I think for martial arts we know that it's never only the movement, but I wasn't aware of all the nuances that it has, and how through executing something physical you're also expressing all this feeling of maybe ritual or emotions or judgments. It's super interesting. Yeah, that's why I'm my mouth is like half open. It's very interesting. One of the topics we wanted to cover is etiquette, and maybe it's as someone myself, I've practiced Aikido in Chile and here in the UK. I as I said, like, I don't know how is it to experience it in Japan, where these arts were originated. And maybe it's the when you start going to a dojo and you experience all of these steps of you enter the dojo, you bow, and which is completely different to what you do at home or in your day-to-day life. It's probably the moment where it's the most obvious that you're doing a foreign thing, and because we're talking about this Japan versus US, UK, or Western culture, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's an interesting topic, isn't it? Because the culture, our cultures inform this so much. And I think because notions of etiquette and hierarchy are baked into Japanese culture, and people, have them, embody them since birth, really, no matter what your nationality. I mean, my non-Asian friends who were born in Japan and grew up there also have this. You have this, or even if you've lived there a long time, you have this kind of innate understanding of yourself in the context of everything else, of every circumstance you're in. When you walk into a room, you know, or you should know exactly where you are in the hierarchy. And if you don't, you're very uncomfortable. I think this is something that I know at least a few Japanese I know have struggled with when they move to the US, especially women, because they feel like it's too free. They don't know who they are. They don't have any frame of reference for how to behave. And it's very
I
difficult.
don't know how to relate to other people.
Because they're not sure of where they stand, because in the West, it's like you're who you are, and you're taken on your own terms. I think it can be very, very difficult, very, very difficult. So naturally, this leads to a lot of misunderstanding when it's applied in martial arts and in tea ceremony. And I think one thing that often happens is kind of the over formalization of things. My friend in Japan, Tommy, he used to call Chiba Sensei students, they're semi-samurai, like you're LARPing this thing that you really don't understand. And so you just, you really go overboard with it. And yeah, it's something Chiba Sensei students are definitely guilty of. And Japanese teachers in general, I've seen it not just in Aikido, but I think, how can I say this without overgeneralizing? I think it's possible when you come from another culture and you don't speak the language well, that you need some means of asserting yourself and making your position clear. And putting yourself as the unquestionable boss is one way to do that. Now that's changed a lot, and not all Japanese teachers are the same, but it's a tendency I've seen. And so their students take it on, and there's this, and you see it in Zen, you see it in tea. I mean, you see it in Taiko. It's always this kind of like really trying to be Japanese. And this kind of thing makes me very tired, because it's like worrying about the bowl and the kimono and the, your tea scoop, and forgetting that you need to boil the water with the tea. Right.
I have a very similar thing that happened, like in my husband and my dojo. We had someone coming for trial sessions, and so for the trial lessons we allow them to wear civvies, I guess. You can, just you don't have to wear the dogi, just come as you are, except that this guy had actually practiced Aikido previously. And it's like he came along, he came a couple of times, he got everything Right. But it was like this big kind of ostentatious bow when he came in, like, "Hello, sensei. Thank you for receiving me, sensei." Like, saying all the right things. And then it was like, "Where's your top?" He's just wearing a t-shirt. "Oh, I forgot it." And it's like, okay, so you're coming without your
Exactly.
uniform, you know? And then he's also on our mats instructing our students, you know, correcting our students, you know, and I thought, if you're gonna do that, man, like, at least wear your uniform, you know? So
Yeah.
it's kind of like he's got all of the superficial stuff, but then the stuff that matters, it's like out the window, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, things like that have happened to me too.
Mm.
It's a little funny, like someone who'll roll on the mat and just like be carrying a I remember there was one guy, he came early and he had that little I'm not a fan of John Stevens' translations. I'll just put it frankly. So he had this little mini book of the Doka of Roo Sensei, and it's John Stevens' translation. And I was like, "Mm." And he's like very, demonstratively reading it on the mat before practice. I was like, okay. I don't
Wow.
know. I was like, you're probably not gonna find a lot of connection here. Sorry. Yeah, he didn't last. Um,
That's
but yeah,
funny.
I think, this is it's funny because this is something and it may be particularly American, like the Europeans in Hombu Dojo used to make fun of Americans because we were always the first ones to like, if there was a visitor, we would come help them and show them what the right way was. And like the Germans and the
Mm,
French, they're just like, oh, whatever, they'll figure it out. But Americans are very concerned with what's right. This is a huge cultural tendency in us, which I mean, it just is whether it's good or bad. And so that manifests, at least in American dojos, in people's security tends to be linked to knowing what's right. Like if you go into this foreign environment where you don't have, you're not certain of your position, you don't
mm,
have a way to establish your role, then you're gonna cling to what you think you know is right. And I when I first started my dojo, I was raised Quaker, which is like very non-hierarchical. You,
right.
you know, you they abolish hierarchy. The only thing you respect is the Holy Spirit, right? Other
Mhm.
people are just your equals. And so it's even now, even though I'm not Quaker anymore, it's very hard for me to make myself into this boss figure. I'm just not comfortable with it. I teach collaboratively in a way, but it's very necessary. I learned the hard way. My first dojo in
Mm,
Traverse City, I was like, yeah, you don't have to call me sensei. Oh, well, if you want to bow when you come on the mat, you can do this. And things just fell apart.
really.
People didn't, the class didn't hold together because people don't take you seriously. So I think you need to have some sort of ritual. And even now in my dojo, I've started being a little more formal with bowing in and bowing out. And you have to stay in line until I get off the mat, kind of thing. Just because I want people to know how to behave with another teacher or in another dojo, not because it's important to me that they treat me like a pope.
Mm,
But people respond very well to it, and I think that they like that. And so I think it's a kind of a balance between relying too much on it and making that like the whole thing, and giving people some structure, uh, and a way to kind of ground in the context of this other crazy stuff you're asking them to do. Does that make sense? Sorry,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
was a bit.
Mini question, because we haven't talked about your experience doing Shotokan, and also it's super interesting to hear about the difference between arts when they become competitive and when they're not. So does all of this etiquette and hierarchy, does it change when you move across this context, competitive, non-competitive, and so on?
I think very, very much so. I wish my body hadn't broken down. Uh, Karate just really took what was left of my hips and wrecked them. I loved it. I really loved it. And the Shotokan Dojo, I practiced at the Shotokan Dojo in Iidabashi, and that's where the professionals, the JKA teachers, practice. They go for noon class every day, and then you have these incredible teachers. Naka Sensei, who's a super famous teacher. was one of my favorites. Takahashi Sensei taught the women's class. And, all these people have been like national champions, world champions. They're just in the dojo teaching, whatever. And etiquette was very loose there, to the point where Japanese people never came late, but like the foreign people would roll into class late, and I was just appalled. I was like, "How could you come late?" I yelled at them one time, which really wasn't my place. I was pretty junior, but it just made me so mad. I felt it was really disrespectful. But the teachers didn't really care. They're just like, "You show up, we'll practice." And you saw it also going out with the teachers after class. With Aikido teachers, you're always very careful to, get a fresh ashtray and pour their beer and make sure they're served first. In Shotokan, you were just like a freak if you started doing, like, I offered to pour my teacher's beer. He's like, "No, I got it, man. Don't worry about it." And I was like, okay, it's a very different vibe, very, very different vibe. And I don't know if it's just because it's karate. Has a culturally a different position in Japan, shall we say? I mean, it's a martial art, but it's considered, I think, more of a blue collar martial art than arts like Aikido and Iaido, which are more upper class. Karate came from Okinawa, which is not a historically respected place. It came from China, which was not a historically, I mean, everything was stolen from China. But anyway, let's not get into the history. It's just, it occupies a very different context, I think, in Japanese culture. And so that comes across in the etiquette. But at the same time, when you practice, you're practice. Like, there's no room for like happy fun times in karate. There was blood on the floor when I came in, from the noon class. I remember sometimes I'd come in for the 5 o'clock class. They had teachers class at noon, and sometimes they'd forget, like, there'd be blood on one of the pillars that they'd missed to clean up or whatever. I mean, it was rough. It was rough. not,
Wow.
not for civilians. I was a civilian, but I think when the teachers train, it's like break teeth and break bones. And yeah, it's a very serious dojo. So I feel like I've lost the plot of your question, Fran. I'm sorry. West and East.
But you did. I mean, it's super interesting. In a previous episode, we talked about cultural appropriation, for example, and maybe that's a topic where this tension becomes obvious as well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Hmm. Hmm. Cultural appropriation is interesting, isn't it? When I first started my dojo, I reached out to local news organizations to try to get some publicity about the dojo here in Kalamazoo, and didn't get much traction. And one guy straight up told me, like, "We can't write about that because what you're doing could be classified as cultural appropriation." I'm like,
Wow.
I've studied in Japan for 8 years, and I've given my life to this practice. I've learned from Japanese people. I've gone there and I've sweated. And my tea teacher particularly really wanted me to come back to the US and teach tea. He really wanted tea to be shared with everyone, not just kept in Japan. And I think, honestly, not to be reactionary or anything, but I think the accusation of cultural appropriation is very often lobbed at women more than men, because it's a very, just watch it. Just watch. It's something I've observed. Men get away with a lot more in terms of taking something from another culture and being quite free to share it with people, whether they're qualified or not, and no one questions them. But when women do it, it's a bit different, isn't it? I feel it's something I've definitely seen and been exposed to. For me, Japan is not a marginalized culture. That's the other thing. Cultural appropriation is about taking advantage of a marginalized culture and utilizing it for your own advantage. Japanese people, I tell you, do not feel marginalized. They know people are interested in what they're doing, and they're very proud to have it shared. I think it's a bit different if if you don't know what you're doing and you buy a kimono at a thrift shop and dress up for Halloween and in looking ridiculous and whatever, call yourself slutty geisha or whatever, then don't do that. Right. But teaching a Japanese art, it the Japanese culture found value in these arts and made it a spiritual touchstone, right? And I think there's an essence of these arts that has nothing to do with the external trappings, but there's an essence in each of these arts that I'm looking for that I want to share in a way that Americans can truly understand it, not just imitate it, not just be Sammy Samurai, but like really embody it. Like, how do you do that? That is the koan of my life
Mm.
in these arts. And tea ceremony was a real key to unlocking that for me. And like, tea is so foreign. You do tea ceremony for Americans is like, what? I have to sit in this uncomfortable position and eat these weird sweets and drink this bitter drink, and like, where's the fun in this? So, how do you transmit what that really is? You know, just keeping
Mm.
some of the rigor. And this, I know we could go on forever, but let me give you an example. At summer camp this year, a BNA summer camp, I was after class, I was just folding my hakama like you do, and I was next to a guy from a local dojo and a shodan, and he was folding his hakama and doing an absolute crap job, and I was making fun of him. I'm like, hey, if you're pleased to wear the hakama, you should be able to take care of the hakama, right? And he said, Sensei, you don't understand. He immigrated here from another country, so a first generation American. I can't stand tradition. I came here to get away from tradition, and so I feel like, all these rules. I don't like rules. That's why I like Aikido. There's no rules. And I was like, well, how about we think about it differently? I said, think about what I've learned in these arts is like tea ceremony, for example, is extremely restricted. Every movement is precise, and the way you put the chashaku down, you put the top down first and then the end. You handle everything very
Mm.
in this very prescriptive way. And somehow through that you find freedom that you can't find in when there are no rules. Like sometimes having boundaries allows you to really find freedom because you that's all you can concentrate on. Everything else is delineated, right? So
Mm.
then you can find freedom of expression because you don't have to worry about the other stuff. And he was like, oh, that's a really interesting way to think about it. And I said, yeah. And plus, your hakama, you can't do Aikido without your hakama. This is like finishing training and not bowing to your partner, right? You fold your hakama. I guess I'm a little uptight about that. But anyway, this is a very, interesting question to me.
Yeah. So you have kind of covered this a little bit. I guess we want to ask you more directly, because when we approached you about what you would like to discuss with us on this podcast, I think the way you phrased it was how could Japanese arts be of use to people in the West, or perhaps of benefit to people in the West, and you have touched on that here and there as we've been talking, but did you have any further thoughts on that at all?
I think the word on the street is that Aikido is becoming increasingly irrelevant. Everybody's drawn to
Mm.
jujitsu, and I think in this polarized age, when we are encouraged to see people as labels, an art like Aikido or something like tea ceremony, which forces you to come face to face with an actual, as I keep saying, to acknowledge the humanity of the person you're working with. This is what we need to change the world. This is what we need. We need to have this mindset that the person I come across in the street is not a Karen, it's not a Republican, it's not a Tory or whatever,
Mm.
it's a human being that I need to engage with on the level of a human being. And I need to somehow make it possible for them to engage with me on the level of a human being. And we need to do this while still being true to our values. And that to me is what where I see the utility of Aikido. And again, many people can disagree with me, and that's, they're probably just perfectly correct. But for me, this is the potential and the value I see in these arts, is that it's what old senseis talked about his Aikido later in life. Of course, in the 50s, 60s, he talked about Aikido being a bridge. And I believe this is really what he was talking about. He saw the division in the world already, and he saw what had happened in the aftermath of World War II. And he said, we need a bridge. And my interpretation of what he was talking about is that human connection. And Aikido is unique in that the relationship between uke and nage, if you're practicing correctly, is one of immense trust. And I get very, very upset when I see people abusing their ukes or, battering them around. I'm trusting you to take care of my body, to study what you need to learn, and to abuse that is quite an offense, I think, against the integrity of the art. And people may think this is funny coming from a student of Chiba Sensei who was often accused of abuse. But I having been with Chiba Sensei, I think that was not, he had a temper, sure, but his actions didn't arise from an abusive motive. They came out of a profound, burning desire to change people, to put them on the path to change, the fastest track to change possible. And he wasn't always successful, but his scariness, was his way of forcing you to look at yourself and to change. Anyway, yeah. Does that get at it a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot to chew on.
Yeah,
Yes,
I chew on it. I chew on it a lot. I chew on my memories of Chiba Sensei a lot.
It's so little, like what you see from superficially from the outside when you see other people practicing and everything, but all that you've been saying, like every component of the dojo adds a bit, like the sensei, the relationship that the people have with the sensei, the relationship between the students, the relationship between the senior students and the junior students, all these human level interactions and the different positions and meanings attached to these different positions leads us very nicely to a suggestion that one of our listeners sent, and they ask about the senpai kohai relationships and hierarchy more generally. And the question is, how do we navigate dojo hierarchy in Western society? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, again, I think this is very strongly rooted in cultural perspective, right? In the West, I think we tend to think about hierarchy in terms of power. The higher up you are in the hierarchy, the more power you have. Whereas actually, I think in Japanese culture, the higher up in the hierarchy you are, the more responsibility you have. And so it's a bit different, right? And I think I wrote an essay about this for Brooklyn Aikikai that got picked up. I think Guillaume Erhard actually translated into French at some point. He put it on his website. A bunch of people have read it somehow. And I think I was just in the dojo. You need to understand that the more you know, the more you're responsible for helping your teacher transmit it. And that's all that means to be senior. That's the only thing it means. It doesn't mean you get off, you don't have to clean. It means that maybe instead of cleaning, you have to help with the bills, the budget, or what do you call it? Reconciling the accounts, or maybe you have to help with something that requires a bit more privacy. But it doesn't mean you stop working, right? I clean the toilet in the dojo. If no one else does it, I'm there cleaning the toilet. And again, maybe this comes from my Quaker background, but there are many, many kinds of teachers in Japan. And some teachers require people to carry their bags and open the doors for them. And other teachers, my favorite kind of teachers, will finish class and then come out and bring a package of cookies and a pot of tea out on the mat and sit around and talk with their students about the weather. And that's the kind of teacher I want to be. So there's not just one way in Japan to be a teacher, right? A teacher of Aikido or anything. it's a very personal choice. In San Diego, it was very clear. Chiba Sensei was the chief instructor, and his assistant instructor was a guy named Murashige Sensei, Murashige Morihiko. And Murashige Sensei was very informal. His Aikido was fantastic, amazing, like absolutely phenomenal. But he would introduce himself as Mark, and he wouldn't, he just was absolutely in Japan as Sunao, just not wanting to put himself in a position of greatness at all, because he didn't want the responsibility. He just wanted to train. So he understood, it was very interesting. It was a very interesting example of manifesting hierarchy. There was no question he was the second in command after Chiba Sensei, but he didn't have the same responsibility to the students. They were Chiba Sensei students, and he was very clear, you are Chiba Sensei students. Same thing in Hombu with Miyamoto Sensei. He would always say, you're Doshu student, you're not my student, you're Doshu student, because he didn't want to be responsible for us. So I've been in Western dojos where the senior student bows and says, "Arigatou gozaimashita, kohai." And you like, what are you doing? Like, you don't, that's not it. That's not it. Okay. That's not it. And when you get off the mat, if you see me in the grocery store, please just call me Roo. That's how I feel. It's like, I'm not, yeah, it's weird. People get weird about it. So I think the most important thing is to remember that, when you don't know anything, you're reliant on people who know more, and you're placing your trust in them. And that's a burden. To be trusted like that is a burden, and you have to take it very seriously.
Kathy, you recently opened your dojo. Well, yeah, it's been almost a year. And as one of the seniors in our dojo, because we're both students of Ismail Hassan Sensei, did you feel that, being that nuance, right? Because in your dojo, you're the sensei, and in our dojo, you're a senior, and you're at the same time you're experiencing both roles, basically.
This senpai kohai relationship is also contextual, isn't it? I guess like everything in Japan, it's heavily contextual. And I mean, actually, in our dojo, I don't feel like I understand. I have a feeling like I have some responsibility. Like I do feel a sense of responsibility towards the dojo, but I don't really see myself as like one of the senpais necessarily. I kind of see, Genevan in that way. But interestingly, with my own dojo, I'm because I'm one of the teachers, and yes, I hold this certain position in the hierarchy, yet I'm also not my student senior. I'm not necessarily my student senior in terms of like age and life experience. For example, I have students who are older than me, so there's also a sense of like navigating. It's not straightforward. I have people in my dojo that are more senior than me in other ways and other aspects of life, and I think that's also important to remember.
I remember in my T class, my teacher was Yamada Sensei was my teacher, and there were a couple of students who were elementary school teachers, and they were called Sensei in the T class. It was funny, yeah. Just because they were a sensei, that was who they were, and Yamada Sensei knew they were teachers, and so he would say, "Oh, Yoko Sensei, can you do this, please?" Because she was a teacher, and so but there was no question, like he was teaching her T. So very, very interesting, right? How do you? I have so many thoughts. I'm sorry.
No, please.
Hombu Dojo, Aikikai Hombu Dojo in Tokyo is very interesting because it's a number of master teachers, and this was the same in the Hombu dojo for karate too. The guy, always a guy, unfortunately, in front of the class, except in karate, there were a few women. But the person teaching the class is teaching that class. And some of the people taking that class had been training back when Roo Sensei was alive. But they're taking this class with a teacher who maybe just came up in the 80s or the 90s. Um, and in Hombu dojo, there's no sense of like, I mean, there are people who are teaching off to the side or showing people things or whatever, but Hombu has a separate floor for beginners. So if you come up to the third floor, it's assumed that you know how to fall, you know how your basic techniques. So all you need to do is focus on what the chief instructor or the instructor for that class is doing, and you do that, and you don't interpret it for other people. I mean, that again, it happens, but it's not cool to do that. And that was made clear to me very early on. Like you just keep your mouth shut and you train and you try to do whatever the teacher's doing. And so if you're not interested in what that teacher's teaching, don't go to their class and practice your stuff. You practice. If you go to Hombu and you take Osawa Sensei's
Do what's
class, you're
being
doing
shown.
Osawa Sensei's. Yeah. Yeah. And for beginners, this is very difficult. And I think Hombu is a very difficult place to be a beginner because you don't have like a solid framework to build your Aikido on. I feel again very lucky because I started with a student of Chiba Sensei. We did Ikkyo the way Chiba Sensei did it. I've always done Ikkyo the way Chiba Sensei did it until I met Murashige Sensei, who does Ikkyo completely differently, but it's the same. But then at Hombu, people approach Shomenuchi Ikkyo in very different ways, and you try them all. This is like the ha stage, really. So you should go to Hombu as second, third dan. Very hard place to be a beginner, I think.
I first went to Hombu Dojo when I had 7 months of training experience, and it was difficult. I actually did some of the beginners classes on the floor below, and then after a while I just was going to the classes on the top floor. And the thing that was really difficult was that they showed the technique 4 times. Omote, omote, ura, ura. And then it was like, off you go. And yeah, so and it was like, for me, it was such a steep learning curve, but it was really good because it really taught me how to watch. Because at that point, I was still at the stage where I could watch something and then be like, right, I got it. And then go with a partner, and it's suddenly like, oh, I've completely forgotten what it is. But there, it's like you just the pressure to at least get the footwork down just from watching. It really helps me improve. And it's a very different. I don't know if this is a difference in teaching styles and the learning process between Japan and the West, where in Japan it's very much in the traditional way is watch, copy, don't ask questions, off you go. And in the West it's much more broken down, and there's more of a dialogue and stuff, and perhaps a little bit more hands-on. That was my first experience. But of course, then going to Hombu Dojo again as a more experienced practitioner was less scary, I guess. A different experience. But yeah, I could. But that was my feeling. It was, yeah, if you're an absolute beginner, it would be very difficult to learn there.
Now,
Yeah.
if you tried to teach that way at your dojo, how do you think it would go?
Oh, it would be an
This is
absolute shit show in my dojo.
yeah.
It'd be a disaster.
Mine too. I've tried it, and people just leave. They're just like, I can't do this, and they
Right.
leave because they have the option to leave. So
Right.
I always think about
So
this. I'm like, yeah, how do you create an environment where you make people want that? Because that's really how I would prefer to teach. But
Like in
Westerners just
silence,
can't.
like no talking,
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
yeah, no
Yeah.
explanation. Let's just practice over and over, because this is really how Aikido should be taught, is like just repetitive practice. You know, you go to the dojo every day, practice for an hour and go home. And that's what it is in Japan. But in the US, I mean, I have most of my students come once a week, you know, and so you can't get that repetition in your body. It's very different. So this, I get, again, you're back to this process oriented learning mode that I
Yeah.
think really works better for Westerners. And you know, I always wonder, I'm not sure, you know, are you losing something of the essence? And my conclusion is no, because we're culturally different. But when we go to Japan, we are able to do it their way. So maybe there's some. This is something I want to learn as a teacher, right? This is my goal as a teacher. Is like, how do we get people there? Because I don't have the mystique that Chiba Sensei had of being like a Japanese man, you know, didn't have to say anything. You had, but you know, look at me. Nobody's gonna put up with that for me. They just don't.
I
So you
also
have to do
have sorry, I also have an experience where it was Kuribayashi Sensei went to Chile to do a very big seminar, and people from different parts of the country, where of course now you have like the Latino layer of practicing martial arts, which is there is of course you learn the etiquette, and the hierarchy plays out in its own way and everything, but it's much, the relationship with your teacher is very informal, like and again of course each individual teacher has made their decisions of how they want to be as a person. And I remember being in that seminar, and for example with my teacher back then, it was very normal to, after he explained a technique, to ask a question as he was like walking through, and oh sensei, but you said this, does it look right? And for me it was norm, that was the norm. And after it was a 2-day seminar, and after at the end of the first day, Kuribayashi Sensei told everyone off for being so close, like no one respected the distance. And he said like it can be that people are asking to take ukemi, it can be that people are asking questions, blah blah blah. And I was angry. I was like I felt like, oh, but this was my thinking, like, where does he think he is? Like, this is not Japan. That was the first thing I thought. And I never, and until later, because I hadn't experienced many other teaching contexts, and until later I thought, okay, that's his way, like he prefers to maintain certain distance. Maybe in that context it's not right to say, sensei, look at me, is this right? So yes, that's just one example of when you don't know, and there is
people were really asking to take ukemi? People were really asking to take ukemi?
Not in the context where he's showing something and people say, take me. No. In the sense,
Right, okay.
no, like it was a huge. No, that's why I was surprised that he was so angry, because it wasn't like that. I mean, the etiquette is not that different. It was in a context where he was walking around and people would make small groups.
Yeah.
And I think that when people ask questions, some of them were like, can you show me? And that was interpreted as, can I take ukemi from you? But no, at least in the groups I was, no one said like, can I take ukemi? No.
No, but yeah, in Chile, it's a different. Yeah, I taught in Chile one time. I went there and taught. I loved it. You know, it depends on what kind of teacher you are, I suppose, because it's like I just want people to understand what I'm trying to do. So, you know, try it, see if it works. Let's see. It's like a big experiment to me. Like, oh, my shit works for me. Does it work for you? Maybe no. But then yeah, but people do come up and they're like, "Can I feel it?" I'm like, "Sure, here you go."
Yeah, I think that was the can I feel it? That was the question. That with this huge, probably it was his first time teaching in Chile as well. So maybe I think he's been there a couple of times after that, so he didn't end up hating it or anything.
Yeah. No, I think this is kind of a problem unique to Aikido, though. Well, maybe not, but in karate, for example, you're not going to get that, because the person will kick your ass.
Can I feel it? Like, yeah, if you
Really?
want.
You want to? Okay. Can you take it? So yeah, Aikido, but you see this in Iaido as well, for sure. Students, I think, again, it's just a cultural difference. And Japanese teachers who are fluent in both cultures, you watch Yoko Sensei, for example, Okamoto Yoko Sensei, how she manages she's used to foreigners. She lived in France, so she gets it and she's fine with it. But I think for Japanese instructors who haven't had a lot of exposure to Western cultural habits, they're shocked. It's shocking to them. It's offensive. It's because there's this innate hierarchy that they feel is present, but no one else is aware of, right? So it can be very shocking. It's just to me, it's a cultural issue. It's not because Kuribashi Sensei is a jerk or people in Chile are jerks or anything like that. That's just like, we're not relating in the same way. We don't have the same cultural expectations. And so let's just, let's work it out. So I'm sorry that he got upset about it, but now I think
the
he
next day,
probably would
to
have
be
a
fair,
different
it was much nicer. So we all got we got the message of how he would feel more comfortable in the interactions. And I think he also, maybe someone afterwards told him, like, this is an international setting, you need some level of adjustment.
But
But
good for him.
I do remember
It's,
that it was different.
yeah, I think, if you have expectations of etiquette that you feel, people should know, then it's good to just say that, in a non-judgmental way, just like, this is how a teacher should be treated, because people don't know it. We're not psychic, right? So if it's not your culture, you don't know. So if you offer it in that spirit, like, this has nothing to do with me. This is like etiquette. This is part of the art. Then yeah, that's great. That's good and valuable. If it's like, you don't talk to a sensei like that, what are you doing? Then that's not so great, right? So it all
Yes.
depends the spirit that you approach it in. And I think that's a very good point about the question of etiquette, is like, how do you enforce etiquette and what do you view its purpose is it just to show your power, or is it something else? And that's what you really need to examine in yourself when you're thinking about etiquette.
Absolutely. Well, this has been super, super interesting. I feel like we could go on for ages, really, with
Yeah, sorry.
with more and more. No, it's fantastic. So I probably this is a good point to close. We have a question for you, Fran. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I'm going to be honest and say that the original question says, in a sentence, why do you practice martial arts? But you don't have to say it in a sentence. It would be taking the richness out of it. So, and also you can decide which martial art you want to focus on, or if you want to talk about all of them, it's great. So why do you practice martial arts? What drives you, Roo?
It's such a hard question because it changes. The answer always changes. I think martial arts specifically, as humans, we're drawn to them because humans have a capacity for violence, right? And if you want to master that capacity for violence, you have to understand it. And in order to understand it, you have to have a way to manifest it safely, right? That doesn't involve beating people up who aren't like consenting to it. So to me, studying martial arts specifically is about understanding that aspect of myself. And violence against other people is one of the huge problems in the world today and why we can't live together. So I think in the bigger picture, it's how can I how can I do one small part to make the world better, is through studying martial arts and understanding my own capacity, understanding, controlling, sublimating my own capacity for violence.
Wow.
That's today's answer. Also, I love
Thank
it and I can't live without it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for again for your time, and it's been really interesting. We hope you've enjoyed it as well. We
Very
certainly
much.
went on a few tangents, didn't we? So
No,
We
I
also
enjoyed really. It's really great to talk to you. I really appreciate what you're doing, especially bringing women to the forefront in martial arts. We're typically not foregrounded. So yeah, good work. I love watching you both train. I love seeing how you progress. It's really, it's very, I never say anything because I'm just like a lurker on Instagram. Oh yeah, nice. That's good. Good. Okay. Let's keep going. See where
thank
that
you.
goes. Everyone is welcome to come visit me in lovely Kalamazoo, Michigan, Southwest Lower Michigan. The dojo website is www.mitsubachidojo.com. We're on Instagram if you search for Mitsubachi Dojo. I think we're on Facebook too, but there's something weird about that. So Instagram is where to come. And please keep training.
You've been listening to Maai Perspective, where women talk Budo.